This is disgraceful. An absolute embarrassment to this street. Margaret Hollis stood at the cedar fence dividing their worlds, arms locked tight against the autumn chill, watching two young men bear a folding table across the lawn. They wore crisp white shirts and pressed trousers. They moved softly, not intrusively, not loudly, reverently, the way people handle something fragile, something sacred. She hissed the words into her collar. Strangers like that, fracturing a historic block with their spectacle. She'd owned this sanctuary on Whitmore Lane for 19 years. 19 years of flawless, silent perfection. And now, this intrusion. She retreated inside, her fingers already summoning the authorities. Across the fence, Raymond Whitfield, 72, smoothing his tailored navy suit, adjusted the white gardenia on his lapel before placing ivory roses upon the linen. He inherited every word, every bitter syllable. He caressed the petals gently, her favorite, the ones Martha used to wear, and faced his quiet garden. "Let it go," he whispered. "Let it go." What Margaret did not know, could not have guessed in the 19 years she had watched this family from behind her curtains, was this. The woman in the white dress upstairs had the power to strip careers down to their foundations. She had done it before. Quietly, without once raising her voice. The Whitfield home sat at the corner of Whitmore Lane and Calder Street, in one of Charleston's oldest residential neighborhoods. The live oaks out front had been there longer than anyone alive on the block. The house itself, cream-colored siding, wide front porch, black shutters, a door into the deep, almost black green, had stood since 1958. Raymond's father built it, paid for it, and moved his family in when they were one of 4 black families on the entire street. By the time Raymond was grown, and his father was buried, the neighborhood had shifted. Money had shifted, demographics had shifted, but the house stayed, the family stayed. Today it was dressed for a wedding. White wooden chairs sat in rows on the back lawn, 84 of them, arranged in 6 careful lines. A wooden arch stood at the far end of the grass, wrapped in white gardenias and trailing green ivy. Glass lanterns flickered along the stone path. The catering team, hired from a black-owned restaurant downtown, called Magnolia Table, moved between stations with practiced efficiency, arranging trays of she crab soup, cornbread, and peach galette on silver stands. A string trio set up beneath a white canopy at the far left. The sound of a cello warming up drifted over the yard, low and slow, like something trying to say what words couldn't. Guests were arriving. Family from Columbia. Friends from Washington, D.C. colleagues from across the Southeast. Women in wide-brimmed hats, men in tailored suits, children in pressed outfits chasing each other between the oak trees. Upstairs, in the bedroom she had slept in, as a girl, Simone Whitfield stood in front of a full-length mirror. The dress was ivory silk, long-sleeved, with a cathedral veil that pooled on the hardwood floor behind her. She wasn't adjusting anything, wasn't fussing. She was standing still, holding a framed photograph she had taken from the dresser, her mother, gone 9 years now. She held the frame against her chest and closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She just stood there, breathing the way you breathe when you want time to slow down long enough for someone who isn't there to somehow feel it. A knock at the door. Raymond came in. He saw his daughter and stopped walking. His chin dropped. His lip pressed together the way it did when he was fighting something. He crossed the room and put both hands on her shoulders. "Your mother picked out that veil." He didn't say anything else. He couldn't. Simone smiled. She set the photograph back on the dresser, right beside a leather, legal portfolio stamped with the seal of the United States District Court, 4th Circuit. She had closed it that morning and hadn't touched it since. Today she was not a judge. Today she was a daughter, a bride. She took her father's arm. "Let's go, Daddy." Downstairs, near the altar, Marcus Webb waited. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, shoulders back, chin level. His army dress uniform was immaculate, medals aligned, shoes polished to a mirror shine, the silver eagles of a colonel gleaming on each shoulder. 23 years of service, 2 tours overseas. He now led a foundation in Colombia that placed homeless veterans into permanent supportive housing. He had moved 214 families off the street in 4 years. When Simone stepped through the back door onto the porch, Marcus pressed his lips together and looked up at the oak canopy above him. The string trio began to play. The guests rose. Raymond walked his daughter down the stone path, one slow step at a time. Afternoon light filtered through the Spanish moss. A little girl in a yellow dress, scattered gardenia petals ahead of them. The scent of the flowers and the warm October air and the sound of that cello made the world feel, for a moment, like it had been built specifically for this. It held that feeling for exactly 4 minutes and 22 seconds. Then Margaret Hollis's call went through. She described it as a disturbance. Dozens of people, she said, loud music, vehicles blocking the road, possible trespassing. She had used certain words, deliberately, carefully, the kind that tend to accelerate response times. 2 blocks away, 2 patrol units were already moving. The vows had just begun. Simone stood beneath the gardenia arch, facing Marcus, her hands in his. The officiant, Pastor Ellis, who had baptized her as an infant and watched her graduate from law school, smiled at the couple and opened his Bible. 84 guests sat still. Even the children had quieted. Simone's fingers tightened around Marcus's, slightly, not from nerves, but from the fullness of it all. 9 years without her mother, 23 years of Marcus's service pulling him away more than toward. And now, finally, this. She began to speak. I chose you because... The sirens arrived before she could finish the sentence. Distant first, then closer. Then the red and blue lights strobed through the gaps in the fence, flashing across the white tablecloths, the glass lanterns, the faces of 84 people who had come a long way to witness love. 2 patrol cars pulled hard to the curb outside the gate. Engines cut. Doors swung open. The string trio stopped mid-note. Pastor Ellis froze, Bible still open. Simone's grip tightened around the gardenia stems until the ribbon creased. Officer Dale Pruett stepped out of the first car. Early 30s. Close-cropped hair, jaw set. He wore his sunglasses up on his forehead, which gave him the look of a man who had already decided what he was walking into before he walked into it. His right hand rested near his belt. Not gripping anything, just resting. The kind of resting that communicates something without requiring words. His partner, Officer Vanessa Okafor, came out of the second vehicle more slowly. She scanned the yard the way someone scans something that doesn't match what they were told to expect. The chairs, the flowers, the guests in their Sunday best, the children. The 3-tiered cake on the table beside the gift display. Her brow came down. Something was very wrong with the call she'd been sent on. But Pruett was already through the gate. He didn't slow down. He didn't look at the flowers or the guests or the wedding arch. He walked straight down the center of the yard. Not to the side, not around the chairs. Straight through, boots grinding over the gardenia petals that still lay scattered on the stone path. He stopped 5 feet from the altar. We've received a noise complaint and a report of a possible disturbance. His voice landed across the yard, like a stone dropped into still water. Every guest heard it. Every child stiffened. Who's in charge of this property? A murmur passed through the rows. Pastor Ellis stepped back 1 small step. Raymond rose from the front row. He moved slowly, deliberately. He straightened his jacket, touched the gardenia on his lapel, and he walked toward Pruett with the quiet, unshakable steadiness of a man who has spent a lifetime choosing calm over combustion. I'm the homeowner, officer. He kept his voice level. This has been my family's property for 64 years. My daughter is getting married today. That is all that is happening here." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and produced his driver's license. Held it out. Steady hand, steady eyes. Pruett glanced at it for less than a second, didn't take it, didn't read the name or the address printed right there in black and white. His eyes had already moved past Raymond, scanning the crowd in a slow, deliberate arc. The way a person scans something they've decided is a problem before they know what kind. "Do you have a permit for this?" Raymond blinked. A permit. An event of this size on a residential lot requires a city event permit.
Do you have one?
Officer. Raymond's voice didn't rise. "This is a private ceremony on private residential property. Charleston Municipal Code, Section 14, subsection B, does not require an event permit for private gatherings on residential land. I checked before we set up this morning. I've lived on this property since, sir." Pruett raised one finger. "I didn't ask how long you've lived here." Behind Pruett, Okafor moved close and spoke near his shoulder, low but clear. "Dale, the code doesn't cover private events. This is clearly a wedding. We document and we clear out. I'll handle it." 3 words. Cold, final. The kind of words that tell you the decision was made before the conversation started. And right on cue, at the fence line, Margaret Hollis appeared. She walked across her side yard, with her arms folded and her chin lifted, not 1 inch onto Fletcher property, but close enough that no one in the yard had to strain to hear her. "Thank goodness you're here." Her voice carried like a bell nobody had rung yet. "This has been going on since morning. I've asked them repeatedly about the noise and the cars and the people coming and going. They simply do not listen." Raymond didn't turn his head toward her. His eyes stayed on Pruett. "That woman has filed 19 formal complaints against my family in the last 7 years. Not one, not a single one, has ever been upheld." Margaret's voice sliced back. "That's because nobody takes it seriously. Look at what they've done to this block. This isn't a neighborhood event. This is a spectacle." Pruett raised one hand toward Raymond. "I need you to step back, sir. I'll speak with each party separately. I'm standing on my own property, officer, and I'm conducting an investigation. Step back. Now." The yard went silent the way a room goes silent when something crosses a line that can't be uncrossed. 84 people watched a 72-year-old man being told to step back from his own ground, at his own daughter's wedding, by an officer who hadn't once asked a lawful question or looked at the license still extended in his hand. Pay attention to that gardenia on Raymond's lapel. Watch where it goes. Marcus stepped down from the altar platform. He didn't move fast. He walked the way a man walks, spent 23 years learning that how you move in a tense situation matters as much as what you say. Measured, deliberate, eyes forward. He stopped in front of Pruett and extended his right hand. "Officer, I'm Marcus Webb, United States Army, retired. I'm the groom. We are on private property, with 84 invited guests, conducting a lawful private ceremony. Can you tell me the specific ordinance we are currently violating?" Pruett looked at the outstretched hand. "He did not take it, sir. Step back and let me do my job. I asked a simple, lawful question. What law are we breaking?" "Step back, sir." "What law?" 3 seconds passed without sound. The breeze moved through the oak branches. Someone in the back row pressed their lips together and looked at their hands. Okafor spoke again, almost quietly. "Dale, a noise complaint means we document and we leave. That's procedure. This is a wedding." Pruett did not acknowledge her. He turned away from Marcus and walked toward the catering station. He pointed at a young man in a vest who was arranging glasses. "You. What's your name? You have ID on you." Then he turned toward a cluster of men near the gift table. "What about you, gentlemen? I need to verify that everyone on this property has lawful authorization to be here." Raymond's voice came low and firm, barely above a whisper, carrying because of what was behind it rather than how loud it was. You are not going to walk through my daughter's wedding and treat my family and friends like suspects. Not today. Pruett turned back slowly. Sir, I've warned you once about obstruction. At the fence, Margaret Hollis leaned in. See? You see what I mean? No respect. Not for the neighborhood, not for the law, not for anything. I've been saying this for 7 years. Pruett moved to the rows of guests. He walked down the aisle. The same aisle Simone had walked down with her father 16 minutes ago, gardenia petals still crushed under his boots, and he stopped at the second row. I need everyone to have identification ready. We're going to verify each person on this property. An elderly woman in the third row, Marcus's aunt from Greenville, 81 years old, wearing a lavender dress and a matching hat with a silk flower pinned at the brim, looked up at him with eyes that had seen things Pruett had not yet lived long enough to imagine. ID, baby? This is a wedding. I was invited personally, ma'am. I need to see identification now. Her fingers went to her purse clasp. It wouldn't open. The woman beside her leaned over. It's all right, Auntie. It's all right. It was not all right. Pruett moved to the next row. A man in his late 60s, a retired federal prosecutor from Columbia who had argued cases before the Fourth Circuit, sat with his wife. Pruett pointed at him. Sir, ID. The man looked at him without moving. Officer, I drove 3 hours to watch my goddaughter get married. You want to see my license for sitting in a chair? Sir, I will not ask again. The man reached slowly into his jacket pocket. His wife reached over and gripped his arm. Her eyes went somewhere else, somewhere old. Something that lived in the body rather than the mind, that gets passed down without anyone meaning to pass it on. Pruett worked through the rows methodically, row by row, pointing and waiting. He wrote nothing down. He had no list. There was no list. There was just a man with a badge asking people to prove they had the right to be somewhere they had been invited to with love. Okafor stood at the edge of the yard with her arms crossed. She watched him move through those rows. She had words right at the base of her throat. Every few seconds she pushed them up toward her mouth. Every few seconds something else pushed them back down. She would think about that later, in a way that didn't let her sleep. Pruett returned to the front. He had done his performance for the guests. Now he wanted more. I'm going to need to walk through the interior of the residence. Raymond stepped forward immediately. Absolutely not. Sir, I have reason to. You have no reason. You have no warrant. You have no probable cause, and you do not have my consent. You cannot enter. If I have reasonable suspicion of what? Raymond's voice was still low, but it had weight in it now, 64 years of weight, and a father's particular weight on top of that. What exactly are you suspicious of, officer? The cake? The cello? What is it that you suspect is happening here? Pruett didn't answer. He walked toward the back porch, toward the door, toward the hallway where 3 generations of Whitfield family photographs hung in matching frames, toward the bedroom where a bride had held her dead mother's photograph against her chest an hour ago, and breathed. Marcus moved before the door was within Pruett's reach. He didn't run. He walked to the back door and stood in the frame, feet shoulder-width apart, hands at his sides, shoulders level, blocking it the way a man blocks something sacred. Not with force, but with a kind of presence that forces the air around it to change. You do not have permission to enter this home. You do not have a warrant. I am a retired officer of the United States Army, and I am telling you plainly, this is a private residence and you are not authorized to enter. Pruett stopped 2 feet away, close enough to read the medals. He didn't read the medals. He looked at Marcus the way he had looked at everyone else in that yard. Like something to manage, his right hand moved from his side to the grip of his service weapon. He didn't draw. He didn't need to. The movement said everything it needed to say. Behind him, 84 people who had come to witness love watched a man's hand move to a weapon. Several of them stopped breathing. "If you do not step aside, I will place you under arrest for obstruction of a law enforcement officer and interference with an active investigation. This is your final warning." Marcus did not blink, did not shift his weight, did not move 1 inch. "Then you will have to explain to a judge why you arrested an unarmed man in his own doorway at his own wedding." The yard held everything it had inside it, every breath, every word, every childhood memory embedded in the soil of this lawn, and held it without releasing any of it. From the fence, Margaret Hollis watched, and she nodded. Slowly, approvingly, a small, satisfied tilt of her chin, like a woman watching a plan arrive at exactly the moment she designed it for. Simone saw it. She saw the nod. She saw the tilt. She saw the whole architecture of what had just happened. Who had summoned this? Who was performing it? Who was directing it from the edge of her neighbor's property? And she understood it with a clarity that only comes from spending 2 decades in rooms where truth and its opposite sit 3 feet apart from each other. She stepped forward from the altar. Her dress moved over the grass. Her veil drifted behind her. She stopped 6 feet from Pruett and spoke. Not loudly, not quickly. The way a person speaks when they know that every word is being recorded somewhere, by memory, by phone, by the air itself. "Officer, you responded to a noise complaint regarding a private event on private residential property. You have identified no probable cause. You have produced no warrant. You have demanded identification from private citizens without legal basis, and you are now attempting to enter a private home without consent or legal authority, in direct violation of the 4th Amendment of the United States Constitution. I am strongly advising you to reconsider your next action." Pruett turned to look at her. He looked at the woman in the wedding dress, the way he had looked at everyone else in this yard. Like she was something beneath the situation. Like her presence was an inconvenience he would resolve when he got to it. Then he almost smiled. "Ma'am, I don't need a legal lecture from the bride. Step back or you'll find yourself in cuffs alongside your husband." From the fence, Margaret's voice came again, sharp and righteous. "This is exactly what I told you about. No respect. Not for the law, not for the community, not for anything. They think they can do whatever they want." Pruett turned back to Marcus. "Hands behind your back." "What am I being charged with?" "Obstruction of justice, interference with a law enforcement officer, hands behind your back." Now. The yard stopped breathing. Marcus looked past Pruett, past the badge, past the hand on the weapon, past all of it, and found Simone's eyes across the distance between the doorway and the altar. She looked back at him. What passed between them in that look had no words attached to it. It was built from 21 years of distance and return, of deployment and reunion, of 2 people who had loved each other across circumstances that would have broken most things. Underneath all of it, something quiet and certain. "I trust you. Handle it." "We are not finished with this day." Marcus turned around. He placed his hands behind his back, slowly, with the precision of a man who understood that compliance is not the same as agreement, and that surrender is not the same as silence. The handcuffs clicked shut. A retired colonel of the United States Army, in full-dress uniform, medals shining in the October sun, was handcuffed in his own doorway at his own wedding, in front of 84 guests who had driven hours to celebrate something good. Marcus's aunt, in the lavender hat, covered her mouth with both hands. A man in the back row pressed the heel of his palm against his eye and looked at the sky. The little girl who had scattered the gardenia petals pressed her face into her mother's shoulder and went very still. Okafor crossed to Pruett and spoke low and urgent. "Dale, I need you to call this in before we go any further. We need a supervisor on scene." "I have this under control." He took Marcus by the arm and walked him toward the patrol car. Slow, deliberate, public. Simone watched her fiancé, being walked across her father's yard in handcuffs, past the catering table, past the wedding gifts, past the three-tiered cake that hadn't been cut yet. Her face did not crumble. She did not shake. She stood where she was, veil drifting, bouquet at her side, fingers wrapped so tightly around the gardenia stems that two of the petals released and fell. But behind her eyes, something shifted. Something locked into a place that it recognized from habit. 2 steps behind her, her cousin Darius lowered his phone just enough to murmur, "I've got everything, Simone. Every single second of it. The angle is clean." She didn't turn around. Her voice came out quiet and flat. "Good." Pruett was reaching for the car door handle when Simone moved. She didn't rush. She reached into the small satin clutch on the altar table and took out her phone. She dialed from memory, the Honorable Charles Alderman, Chief Judge, United States District Court, District of South Carolina, her mentor, the man who had administered her oath of office 5 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon in a wood-paneled courtroom in Columbia, with her father and her mother's photograph both in the front row. He answered on the first ring. "Charles, it's Simone. I'm at my father's home in Charleston. An officer has just placed my fiancée in handcuffs at our wedding ceremony. No warrant issued. No probable cause articulated. He attempted to enter the private residence without consent, demanded identification from elderly guests without legal authority, and is currently walking Marcus toward a patrol vehicle. I need you to contact Commissioner Aldridge immediately." She hung up, slid the phone back into the clutch, stood still. The breeze moved her veil. The afternoon sun hit the ivory silk of her dress and turned it almost gold. She looked, in that moment, like a painting. Still, composed, and entirely unreachable. Anyone who had ever stood in her courtroom would have recognized that stillness. It was not peace, it was patience. The particular patience that arrives right before a decision is issued that cannot be appealed. 43 seconds passed. Pruett's hand was on the car door. His radio broke the air, like glass shattering. The voice from dispatch came through clean, loud, with the flat authority of someone reading from something they could not ignore. "Unit 7, this is dispatch. Be advised. You are currently on scene at the private residence of Judge Simone Whitfield, United States District Court, District of South Carolina. The homeowner's daughter is a sitting federal judge. Commissioner Aldridge is en route. You are ordered to stand down immediately. Confirm receipt." Every guest in the yard heard it. Pruett's hand left the car door. The color left his face, the way color leaves something when it realizes too late what it was standing on. He turned around, slowly, and, for the first time since he had walked through that gate, he actually looked at Simone. Not past her, not through her. At her, she hadn't moved, veil drifting. Bouquet at her side. The 2 fallen gardenia petals on the stone path at her feet. 6 words, measured, final. I told you to reconsider. No anger in it, no triumph, just a fact being deposited into the record. Behind Pruett, Okafor was already moving. She reached Marcus at the patrol car and fumbled the key twice. Her hands were not entirely steady and unclasped the cuffs. "Sir, I am so sorry. This should not have happened. None of this should have happened." Marcus rubbed his wrists. There were red marks on both, the kind that photograph well, as anyone with legal training would quietly note. He looked at Okafor and nodded once. The nod did not absolve her, but it acknowledged the difference between her and what she had stood next to. 7 minutes later, a dark gray sedan pulled up without sirens, without lights. The quiet arrival of a vehicle that doesn't need to announce itself because the people inside it are the announcement. Commissioner Reginald Aldridge stepped out in civilian clothes. Khaki trousers, a half-zip pullover, reading glasses he hadn't bothered to put away after being called off his Saturday afternoon. He had driven himself. He had understood. From the first sentence Charles Alderman had spoken to him, exactly how severe this was. He took it all in. The disrupted ceremony, the trembling guests, the grandmother in the lavender hat with wet cheeks, the children pressed against their parents, the groom rubbing red marks on his wrists, and the bride, a sitting federal judge, standing in her ivory dress beside a patrol car on her father's lawn, with 2 fallen gardenia petals at her feet. He walked to Simone first. "Your Honor." He didn't try to make his voice warm. Warm would have been insulting. "On behalf of the Charleston Police Department, I am deeply and formally sorry for what has occurred on this property today." Simone shook his hand, one firm grip. No warmth returned, no absolution granted. Aldridge turned to Pruett. The officer was standing by the cruiser, mouth slightly open, the beginning of an explanation already forming on his lips. Aldridge cut it off before the first word arrived. "Officer Pruett, you are relieved of duty effective this moment. Badge and service weapon." Now, Pruett's hands shook as he unclipped his badge. The metal made a small, flat sound landing in Aldridge's palm. The weapon came next. He stood in the yard, stripped of everything that had made him feel authorized 11 minutes ago. Aldridge turned toward the fence. Margaret Hollis was still there, but changed. Her arms had dropped, her chin had come down. Her face had gone the particular white that faces go when a very specific kind of fear arrives. Not fear of something happening, but fear of what has already happened and cannot be put back. "Ma'am." Aldridge's voice was even. "Filing a false police report is a criminal offense under South Carolina Code of Laws, Section 16-17-722. Detectives will be in contact with you. I strongly suggest you retain an attorney before that conversation takes place." Margaret's mouth opened. "I had every right. I was protecting my she. Caught herself. This is my neighborhood. I've lived here for—" "Ma'am." Aldridge raised one hand. "This is a wedding on private property. Please go inside your home." Margaret backed away step by step across her own grass. The screen door of her house slapped shut behind her with a sound like punctuation. In the yard, 84 guests sat in the kind of silence that exists between a wound and the decision about what to do with it. Raymond Whitfield stood up from the front row. He moved slowly, one hand on the chair back, one hand smoothing his jacket. He reached up and touched the gardenia on his lapel. Still there, still white. He walked to the center of the yard and faced his family, his friends, the people who had come from Columbia and Washington and Greenville to stand beside his daughter today. He stood there for a moment without speaking. Then, "We have waited too long and come too far and loved too hard to let anyone steal this day. My daughter is getting married. Right here, right now on this land." Silence. Then Marcus's aunt in the lavender hat began to clap. Slowly at first, both hands pressing together carefully, like someone striking a match. Then the row around her joined. Then the next. Then everyone, all 84 of them, standing, some of them weeping, some of them not even realizing they were. The string trio picked up their bows. The wedding march filled the yard again, and it carried something the first time hadn't. Something that comes only from having almost lost something and choosing it again anyway. Pastor Ellis returned to the arch, opened his Bible to the same page, looked at Simone and Marcus with eyes that weren't quite dry, and said, "Shall we continue?" Simone laughed. It was the first time in over an hour. The sound of it moved through the yard like the first clear note after a long silence, and several people, sitting in those white chairs, felt something loosen in their chests that they hadn't realized had locked. They stood beneath the gardenia arch. Marcus took her hands. The red marks on his wrists were still visible below his cuffs. Simone looked down at them, then up at him. Marcus spoke his vows slowly. His voice cracked on the fourth line, and he didn't try to fix it. "I chose you because you are the most composed person I have ever seen in an impossible room. I have led people through things I cannot describe. but I have never in my life seen someone stand the way you stood today. Without raising your voice, without losing yourself, without once letting them make you into something smaller than you are. I am proud. I am so proud, Simone, to stand next to you for the rest of my life. Simone spoke her own vows, the ones she had started under the arch the first time, before the sirens arrived. She said them now from the beginning, every word, without rushing. It had. The afternoon light came through the oak leaves above them and fell across the arch and the dress and the two people standing under it. Pastor Ellis pronounced them married. Marcus kissed his bride. 84 people erupted. The little girl in the yellow dress, who had been holding very still for a very long time, grabbed a handful of gardenia petals from the basket at her feet and launched them into the air with both hands, laughing. Next door, behind a second-floor window, Margaret Hollis watched the celebration she had tried to end. She was not standing tall anymore. Her arms were at her sides. One hand held her phone, her attorney's number already dialed, not yet connected. The video was on the internet before the dinner plates were cleared. Darius uploaded it that evening, unedited, 16 minutes of footage from 2 angles, his phone and Okafor's body camera, which she surrendered voluntarily within an hour of the incident. The thumbnail stopped anyone who saw it mid-scroll. A black man in full military dress uniform, hands cuffed behind his back, standing beside a patrol car, while a bride in a white dress watched from 6 feet away with an expression so still it looked carved. By the following morning, it was on every major network in the country. The headline wrote itself, and every outlet ran some version of it. Officer handcuffs decorated colonel at his own wedding. Bride is sitting federal judge. Cable news played the footage continuously. Morning programs opened with it. Social media turned it into a fire that no department statement could contain. Because the footage did not just show the arrest. It showed everything. Pruett walking down the aisle through seated wedding guests. Marcus's 81-year-old aunt fumbling with her purse clasp, fingers shaking. The young mother who pulled her daughter onto her lap and covered the child's eyes. Raymond being told to step back on his own property. Marcus extending his hand to be shaken and watching it go unacknowledged. Simone citing the Fourth Amendment in her wedding dress and being threatened with handcuffs for it. And it showed Margaret at the fence. Arms folded, chin lifted, nodding. That image. A neighbor nodding approvingly while a man was placed in handcuffs in his own doorway. Became its own conversation. Screenshots with single-word captions. People had seen the nod before. Not from strangers. From closer than that. By Monday morning, the Charleston Police Department's Office of Professional Standards had opened a formal inquiry. By Tuesday, the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice had joined. A federal civil rights investigation under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Investigators pulled everything: Pruett's body camera, which had not been activated, the dash camera from his patrol unit, which had captured audio of the full encounter. Okafor's body camera footage, surrendered immediately, without request, which provided the clearest and most legally significant angle of all. Darius's phone footage. Security camera footage from 3 neighboring properties. Written statements from all 84 guests. Then they pulled Pruett's surfer record. 17 complaints in 5 years, 13 from black residents, 3 from Latino families, 1 from a Haitian immigrant family who had filed and then not pursued it further, for reasons the investigators noted without elaboration. Excessive force allegations, 3 times. Unlawful detention, 4 times. Each complaint had been reviewed internally. Each had been closed with the same language. Insufficient evidence to support disciplinary action. Not anymore. The federal grand jury convened within 3 weeks. The indictments, when they came fast. Against Officer Dale Pruett, unlawful arrest, civil rights violations under federal statute, attempted illegal search and seizure without warrant or probable cause, official misconduct, 4 counts. His law enforcement certification was revoked by the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy before the trial date was set. He would not wear a badge again in any state. Against Margaret Hollis, filing a false police report under South Carolina Code, Section 16-17-722. During the investigation, detectives documented her history. 19 complaints against the Whitfield family over 7 years. Not one substantiated. Not one. The pattern was so consistent and so documented that it drew its own lines without anyone having to draw them. Prosecutors added an enhancement based on demonstrated discriminatory motivation. The Whitfield family filed a separate civil suit. Harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, interference with a private event. The attorney who filed it had been watching Margaret Hollis's complaint file for 4 years, waiting for the moment it became a case. That moment had arrived. Pruett's trial was held in federal court in a district where Simone had no jurisdiction. She recused herself completely. No calls, no conversations, no involvement. She didn't need to be involved. The evidence spoke in a voice louder than any judgment she could have issued. The trial lasted 11 days. Okafor testified on day 4. She took the stand and did not hedge. She described what Pruett had done. She described what she had not done. She described why, in specific terms, including the fear that contradicting a senior partner in the field would be noted in her file, and her advancement would be affected. She made no excuses out of those facts. She simply named them. When the defense asked whether she believed Pruett had acted with racial bias, she was quiet for 5 seconds. Yes, and I should have intervened earlier. I knew what I was watching. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. Guilty. All counts. The sentencing judge, a white woman in her mid-60s, who had spent 31 years on the federal bench, looked at Pruett across the courtroom and delivered words that wire services would carry in full. She said this was not a mistake. She said it was a series of choices, each one made deliberately, each one made when a different choice was available. She said the badge exists to protect the public, not to impose the preferences of whoever calls 911. She said what happened in that yard on a Saturday afternoon in October was a grotesque abuse of public trust, and that the records of this department made clear it was not the first time this particular officer had made this particular kind of choice. 4 years. Federal custody. Pruett showed no expression when the sentence was read. He was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, the same model as the ones he had clicked shut around Marcus Webb's wrists 6 weeks earlier. He looked at his own hands as they were cuffed. He looked at them for a long time. Margaret Hollis's case resolved more quietly, but no less completely. Her attorney advised her that 19 documented baseless complaints constitute a pattern that no jury would interpret charitably. She entered a no-contest plea. The sentence: 18 months of supervised probation, 300 hours of community service, to be specifically at the Low Country African American Heritage Foundation in North Charleston, where she would spend her weekends in proximity to the history she had spent 7 years trying to override. A restraining order prohibiting her from approaching within 500 feet of the Whitfield property. Full payment of the Whitfield family's legal fees in the civil matter, and a formal written apology drafted under court supervision to be delivered to Raymond Whitfield personally. The document arrived on a Tuesday. Raymond read it on the porch, alone in the evening light. He read it twice, set it on the railing beside his sweet tea, looked out at the oak trees for a while. He did not call anyone. He just sat there. The Charleston Police Department announced a reform package within 6 weeks. Mandatory de-escalation training for all patrol officers. a civilian oversight board with independent subpoena authority, new protocols ranked supervisory authorization before any noise complaint escalated to on-scene confrontation, and an independent audit of every successive force complaint filed in the previous 6 years, with particular attention to complaints that had been closed with the phrase insufficient evidence. Simone was invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Association of Women Judges annual conference in Atlanta. She accepted. She stood at the podium in a simple black suit, not her robe, not her wedding dress. She spoke for 26 minutes. She didn't talk about herself. She talked about the families who didn't have a federal title to put between them and what happened on that lawn. About every cookout interrupted, every front porch where someone was asked to justify their presence, every celebration that had been treated as a threat because of the color of the people gathered there. She talked about the children who were learning, not from textbooks, but from what they watched happen to the adults they loved, what the world was prepared to offer them. She said, "The law I swore to uphold exists equally, or it does not exist at all." The room rose before she finished the sentence. 3 months later, Okafor resigned from the police department and enrolled in law school at the University of South Carolina School of Law evening program, working as a paralegal during the day. She sent Simone a handwritten letter, 3 paragraphs, an apology without excuses, a thank you that didn't ask for anything in return, and a final line that Simone read standing at her kitchen counter, then sat down and read again. "I told myself I had no power to stop it. That was a lie I needed to stop telling." Simone wrote back the same week. On Whitmore Lane, a real estate sign appeared in front of the house next door. It had been there for 6 weeks by the time winter arrived. Margaret Hollis moved out on a Thursday. Neighbors watched from their driveways as she loaded boxes into a rental van, alone. No one crossed the street. No one waved. The woman who had spent 7 years deciding who belonged on this street had received her answer. She didn't. The thick manila folder she had kept on her desk, 19 years of complaints, neighborhood grievances, correspondence, HOA filings, sat in the recycling bin at the curb on collection morning. 7 years of paperwork, not one page of it validated. All of it waiting for a truck that would take it exactly where it had always been headed. Pruett was serving his sentence in a federal facility in Lexington County. His appeal had been filed and denied. His name now appeared in training materials used at law enforcement academies in 4 states, listed under a module called Constitutional Limitations of Police Authority. What these cases teach us. Cadets studied his decisions the way medical students study preventable errors, not to understand the person, but to recognize the pattern before it completes itself again. The Whitfield house stood at the corner of Whitmore Lane and Calder Street, same as it had always stood. Same cream siding, same black shutters, same green door, 3 generations of steadiness that no complaint, no cruiser, no neighbor with a phone had been able to move. Simone was back on the bench. Same courtroom, same standard, same fairness she had carried into it from the beginning. Attorneys who appeared before her noticed something, though. A particular quality of attention when testimony touched on traffic stops, on noise complaints, on officers who had neglected to activate their cameras, on civilians asked to prove their right to exist in spaces they were entirely lawful in occupying. She didn't speak about the wedding in court. She didn't have to. Everyone in that courtroom knew. And they understood that the woman behind that bench had not read these cases. She had lived inside one. Marcus broke ground on a new veterans housing development in February. 48 units in North Charleston. Permanent supportive housing, the kind that didn't exist when he first came home from his 2nd deployment and watched men he'd served beside sleeping on the ground under the Ravenel Bridge. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony he wore his dress uniform. A reporter asked him whether it had been difficult to put it back on after what happened. Marcus looked down at the medals on his chest. He was quiet for a moment. "These belong to me," he said. "No one gets to turn them into something painful. Not anymore." The wedding photo sat on the mantel inside the Whitfield house. Simone in ivory, Marcus in dress blues, 84 people standing behind them, clapping, some of them crying. And if you looked closely at the bottom left corner of the frame, you could see the little girl in the yellow dress, arms overhead, gardenia petals launching from both hands, her whole face open with the kind of joy that doesn't know yet how much it costs. The best photo of the day, the one that made it real. Justice doesn't always arrive on time. Sometimes it arrives wearing a wedding dress and it doesn't raise its voice. Sometimes it arrives in a dispatch call that drains the color from a man's face. Sometimes it arrives in a courtroom 3 months later with a sentence that sounds like a door closing. But the question that stays, the one that doesn't get answered by a verdict or a resignation or a sign in a front yard, is the quieter one. What happens to the family that doesn't have a federal judge in the white dress? What happens when there's no call to make, no chief who shows up, no cousin with a steady hand and a recording already running? What happens when the ceremony doesn't get to start over? That's not a story question. That's the real one, and it belongs to all of us. If this story reached something in you, not just because of the ending, but because you recognized someone in it, hit like so it finds the people who need to hear it. Share it if you know someone who has ever been asked to prove they belong somewhere they were invited. And leave a comment. Have you ever been in that yard, on either side of the fence? I read every single one.